Good morning to you all. Nice to see you all here. I hope the first session was interesting. I missed it, so I'll catch up later and see what's going on. But welcome to a session that we're running called Thriving in an Insecure World. And essentially what we're going to be doing is not necessarily looking at GitLab as a platform, but we're going to be going into some results of a survey that GitLab conducted and has conducted over the last 6 years or so into the state of DevOps and DevSecOps inside the industry. So what this session is really going to be doing is focusing on some of those results. Obviously, you've done the floor walk downstairs, you've seen the GitLab stand. We're going to be down there for the next couple of days. Come and speak to us, and we can run demos and all those kind of things like that. So don't be shy, we've got stickers and badges and all the usual stuff. So first of all, my name's Martin McVay. I'm a solutions architect at GitLab. I've been with the company roughly about a year or so. October last year, I joined the organization. I'm based just north of London, and I work within the enterprise customer base. So we kind of deal that as 2,000 or more employees. So my job really is to go and get you excited about GitLab and get you excited specifically about GitLab Ultimate version, because that's where all the good stuff is. I've been in the industry for more than 25 years, grey hair. I started off as a software developer, mainly inside the Java space, in investment banks in London in the late 90s and the 2000s. And then I moved into like the pre-sale side of things, so going into VMware and finally end up here. As a kind of fun fact, I love paragliding. That's a photo of myself in Tenerife a few years ago. And any opportunity to throw myself up a mountain is a good opportunity as far as I'm concerned. So what the context around this talk today really is this survey that you can go and download yourselves. We titled it Thriving in an Insecure World for a reason, and we'll see why. But there's the link that you can go and get the report downloaded in the PDF. As I mentioned before, we've run this over the last 6 years. So we go and speak to developers, we go and speak to operations professionals, we go and speak to security professionals, just to get a gauge for what's happening in their world. What's interesting them, what's concerning them, what tools are they using, what are the things that they need to be doing in order to kind of move forward in their careers. And also, interestingly, how teams and team formation is changing in terms of when we move to more of a DevSecOps model. We have the concepts of multifunctional teams now that actually have to talk to each other. So security professionals have to speak to developers, and developers have to speak to security professionals, and developers, to a certain extent, have to speak to operations, etc. So some of you may be seeing that in your organizations. Some of you may be in big organizations where it's still very siloed, and there's still an attempt to kind of try and make that thing work. But we get a snapshot of where we think DevOps and DevSecOps is. I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably. The Sec side has kind of come in over the last few years because there's definitely an emphasis now on security, as we'll see. And we get these insights into trends and patterns within the industry, and also from a product development perspective inside GitLab. We take on board these results and we use it to drive how we evolve our platform and our offering to customers. So you'll see all the kind of marketing stuff downstairs, and you've probably seen all the GitLab marketing. Is we go and market ourselves as a one DevOps platform, and that's because we've taken feedback from folks in the industry, and it kind of determines how we evolve as a platform. Before we start, though, how many of you are currently GitLab users? Okay, how many of you are using GitLab Ultimate at the moment? You are, okay. We'll have a chat afterwards. Get beers and all the rest of it. That's good. How many of you are kind of working as DevOps professionals? Okay, and what does that mean? Is that kind of like just linking together different tool chains to make them work, different kind of SCM systems, maybe different build systems, maybe security systems? It might be that. Okay. So we'll touch on that as we go through this. So I'll do the presentation. If there's any questions that you have, or if you disagree vehemently with anything that I say, come and get me at the end. We'll have a bit of a session of Q&A at the end. We can have a conversation. Questions, any insights. If you think any of this is resonating with what you're seeing inside your company, let us know. It's good to talk about these things. So The first real insight into what we have here from the survey is that security now has become absolutely paramount in most organizations. So I'm sure most of you are seeing things like Log4Shell, the Spring RCE, for those of you in the Java world, all those nasties coming along that we had to respond to. I'm sure many of you spent many hours overnight going through all your project code bases and trying to work out where this particular Log4j library is being used, etc. So this is now a problem that we have to solve, and not just as development teams or security teams or operations teams, it's as teams that are concerned with delivering software, getting software out the door to our users in the most secure way and in the most traceable way as well. So the number one reason to adopt a platform is security. A DevOps platform is security. The number one benefit of having a DevOps platform is security. The number one investment priority for 2022 is security. How many of you think this is your current state of thinking right now in your world? A few of you, okay. Right. In terms of security and responsibility, this is quite an interesting statistic, or a set of statistics around where folks, developers, ops, or security folks feel that they own the kind of security issues. So 53% of developers believe developers own full responsibility of security. So they believe in the modern world, in the way that they're developing their software, modern SDLCs, CI/CD pipelines, DevSecOps, etc. They believe it's on them to kind of address those any security vulnerabilities that get detected and fix those. 53% equally of security pros believe that it's everyone's responsibility. So security thinks it's their responsibility. Anybody to do with the project, the operations team who's releasing this stuff, the developers, it's all on them to kind of have security in mind. And 48% of operations pros believe that security is their sole responsibility. So what this does kind of interestingly is lead into conversations around where does security or where should security fall in to your modern SDLC pipeline. And with GitLab and the customers over there who are using Ultima, etc., we're very much in a world of shifting security left, very much in a world of making sure that when security vulnerabilities have been detected as part of a build pipeline, the developers or the team who's committing code to make those changes should be responsible for addressing that vulnerability and fixing that vulnerability. And that's not an easy thing to do because you need good, sufficient information around what those vulnerabilities are. So how do we link back to the original CVE or the CWE? How do I get some information on how to address it? How do I fix it? Do I need to upgrade to another version? Do I need to have some kind of training mechanism that my developers can go through to ensure that they don't introduce that vulnerability again? So with GitLab, and especially with inside a merge request process and other tooling that we have around preventing certain types of vulnerabilities from being merged back into our default, is definitely where we see the shift left in security. And you'll see pretty much everybody's bought into that idea in this recent survey. So some detailed highlights of the actual survey itself. So there were 5,000 participants in the survey from a number of different types of organization, from a number of different sizes of organization as well. And I think this computer hardware, SaaS services, software industry, I think this tends to fall into an umbrella term sometimes for maybe like an IT organization working on behalf of another part of the business. But there's the kind of breakdown where we are. With a majority of employee organizations between 100 and 999 employees, and a few greater than 1,000 employees. Definitely a bias towards the US, 78% the US. That's just the way that one works. And the interesting stats that we get back from here in terms of DevOps and DevSecOps is adoption rates for this. So we go to the field and we ask them, over what time horizon have you been working in this way? Have you been organizing your teams in this way? And generally, the kind of organizations, 20% or more, or 20% have 5 years or more of going down this route and experimenting with these methodologies and these tools. and ways of working in terms of empowering teams and all the other good stuff that we get when we go down the dev and the DevSecOps route. Then falling back down to the majority, really 3 to 4 years experience of this, with 1% or less. There's 5% of the population was in that group, but it's the 47% respondents say that this is their methodology of choice. Now, this doesn't mean to say that there are other methodologies, of course, that are in use. There's still a lot of water, scrum, fall, these kind of fake agile type things that are out there. It depends on the project, it depends on the organization, but generally 47% of respondents went towards DevOps and DevSecOps as a methodology of choice. The reasons to go down this route in order: firstly, better code quality. So introducing tools, automation to help us craft pipelines that go off and do code quality analysis for us. So I'll revert back to the merge request conversation that we have inside GitLab. When we can commit our code into our merge request, we can specify a whole suite of tools that will run against that code and tell us about the quality of that code underneath. And we can get feedback with inside the tool that says, you violated this, you've got like an unused variable, or this is an ambiguous method that's only going to return one possible return. So that's point one for adopting DevSecOps. Number two is improving developer productivity. So we want to be able to move faster. We want to be able to get products out of the door sooner, but we want to make sure that the products that we release are good, and they do have good code quality, and there is good testing around things like security, etc. There's no point us in continually trying to churn rubbish code out of the door, because it just means we're going to be delivering not really good things in a faster way. So improving developer productivity, operational efficiency improvements. So this is really around those of you who are familiar with the kind of the value stream and the kind of workflow and waste concepts. How do we eliminate waste from the time when we actually commit code to our repository to it finally becoming deployed into a production or a pre-production environment? How can I minimize that time? And that's minimizing things like manual handoffs, manual testing, etc. It sounds easy, it's very difficult. We speak to a lot of organizations who are in the compliance space. They've got compliance issues to consider. And they also have security considerations as well inside their organizations. But the introduction of DevSecOps and platforms enables them to move faster and develop and deploy applications in a sooner way. And finally, point number 4 here is secure applications. We want to be able to deploy our applications and to make sure they're actually secure. But we also want to make sure that our deployed applications, if there are any new vulnerabilities that have been introduced, and our applications that have been deployed contain those vulnerabilities, we want to be able to monitor those apps and remediate those applications and deployments, so we are up to date with either a dependency upgrade or some other thing to address that. 70% of respondents are deploying at least once every few days. This is up 11% from last year. 27% of respondents are deploying multiple times a day, with a number of respondents deploying once a day or once every few days, and less often than 30%, less often than a few days. How many of you currently do you think are deploying multiple times a day right now? Confidently? Yeah? Okay. So the reasons for the delays that we're seeing, so we're still seeing a move in the right direction. There's a desire to deploy code faster. The top reasons for the delays are code development itself. So this could be a fairly lengthy process. I think a lot of this actually links back to how we actually scope the work that we're doing for these changes and how well they're specified in terms of our user stories, etc. Code review could be quite a laborious process. So if I have a review team and I'm deploying and I'm implementing my changes and I want my peers to review my code, that can be quite a lengthy process if you're not using the correct tools to do so. Security analysis, this can be quite a heavyweight process. It can take time to do. There's always a trade-off between security analysis and testing. to ensure that you're actually doing the sufficient amount of work that's going to be good enough for that piece of work to be deployed into a production environment. Fourthly is test data management and testing as well. So there's interesting conversations, like I just said, around what's too much testing. You know, what can we do? What's the bare minimum that we need to do for this to be acceptable, to be merged back onto my main line, if you like, ready to be deployed into a production environment. Around the topic of automation, so 47% of respondents reported testing is now fully automated. That's an improvement on last year. I think it's around 11 or 12% improvement. So introducing automated testing into the mix. We were doing this, by the way, and probably some of you were as well. We were doing this back in 2000, around that time, 2001, with tools that we were using to run automated tests. Those of you remember, like the precursor of Jenkins, Hudson, tools like that, etc. Back in the day, we were doing these kind of things, but now 47% of respondents say that testing is fully automated. And there's an interesting trend around where the role that AI and ML is coming into play inside the testing frameworks and tooling that we have. So how can we actually optimize, or how can the system optimize the testing of my application, of my code base, in such a way that we can do it as fast as we can, but make sure that we test what we think, or what the system thinks are the essential components that need testing. So there's definitely going to be a move towards AI/ML. So currently 37% are using this, and in the next 2 to 3 years, there's going to be an increase up to 76%, we think. One of the things that's holding folks back is the fact that there are multiple tools out there that are available to do a number of different functions. So software configuration management, CI/CD, test automation, build automation, all of those kind of things, those kind of topics. The problem that we are seeing from organizations, and the feedback that we get back from the field, is that if we have too many tools, it can slow development velocity. There's lots of context switching for developers to switch around between different environments. So if I deploy my code builds okay, it might compile, it might run my unit tests, but where do I go to find out about things like static application security testing? Where do I go and find out things about DAST results, etc.? In a meaningful way that comes back into my world of my delivery lifecycle and my pipeline and my merge requests for my application. Having many tools as well can incur costs and does incur costs. There are license costs that need to be maintained for those. There are maintenance considerations for those tools as well. This point here, interesting point about difficulty in retaining developers. If the tool chain is too complicated and attempts aren't being made with inside organizations to actually make those tool chains simpler and more usable, developers will have an opinion about that, having been one. It could be difficult potentially to retain and attract developers into certain organizations. As mentioned before, wasted time on maintenance. Monitoring of so many tools is an issue. So the question I asked before about folks who work with inside DevOps and DevSecOps, if you're hanging tools together, etc., doing that is a big job in itself, and maintaining those tools is quite a major task in itself. So there's maintenance overheads and a time overhead involved in that. And arguably, there's probably going to be developers who are going to be taking on that responsibility, and developers really don't want to be doing that. They actually want to be writing useful business logic that's going to go and delight their customers and users. So there's developer dissatisfaction with context switching as well. Does any of that resonate with any of you in the room right now? It does, thank you. You saved me on that one, good job. So we go back to the concept of a single DevOps platform here. So 75 respondents from the survey, they use or they plan to use a DevOps platform this year. Now, this kind of term means either an all-in-one platform like ours, like GitLab provides, or that provided by other vendors, or potentially a platform that's been created internally by a DevOps platform team that we tend to see with inside bigger organizations that we go and speak to. But the drivers for these are security and compliance improvements, cost and time savings, easier automation to get things up and running via tools like templating, etc., where if I create certain types of projects, if I'm going to do like a Spring Boot project, for example, I can quickly just create a template and it gives me the project template with my CI/CD build pipelines and all the artifacts that exist and should exist for my project. Easier automation, better monitoring and observability, so monitoring of our deployed applications and our applications and how they've been built in the build pipeline, and streamlined processes as well. Remember, I mentioned the thing about waste in the life cycle. We should always be trying to optimize our processes and tools and workflows so we can minimize waste in our software delivery life cycle. So going back to the shifting left thing here, just to kind of reiterate the concept here of shifting left. So developers now are taking this on board now to address vulnerabilities that are discovered when they commit code into a merge request, for example. So as mentioned, 53% of developers are taking this on board. Security pros, similar amount. Ops pros are kind of in the middle, thinking it's like everybody's responsibility, but we kind of hope that somebody sorts it out. So the shifting left is definitely occurring. And the priorities really around different roles and different, the overall roles and management roles and ops pros and security pros looks a bit like this in terms of like security, cloud computing, DevOps, AI, ML, blockchain, etc. Again, security is featuring with inside the ops pros block there, and security pros are concerned about security, obviously cloud computing and AI and ML as well. So that's the kind of like the high level highlights of what we've seen from the report that we have. We're going to drill down now a little bit more into like the thinking about the different groups. So developers, how many of you in the room are developers? Yeah, all devs. We drive the bus, don't tell anybody else. So developer highlights. So we as far as developers are concerned, and this is the way they see their roles evolving as well, and the pressures that they see in their roles, particularly over the last couple of years, which we've seen with the pandemic, how things have changed, approaches to work, different styles of work, what they need to do to be what they perceive as being successful at their job. So releases are faster. There's obviously pressure to get changes into production as fast as we can, because we want that feedback cycle and we want to be able to iterate on our products. As mentioned, these challenges are real, so things around hiring, security threats that are emerging and evolving all the time. That's on the developers now to take that into consideration. Cultural changes within inside organizations, which is a really interesting one. So back from when I started back in 96, 97, the way teams operated, it was very much kind of like, there's your requirement spec for the project, go and sit in the basement and come out in 3 years when everything's finished. There wasn't this concept of, let's all work together as a multifunctional team, and let's be empowered to have an opinion about how we're going to do this product rather than project. It was very much kind of like, that's what you do, and that's a business analyst who does that kind of stuff. So cultural changes coming in. Tech learning curves, so complex tech learning curves, new technologies coming in that developers have to take on board and learn, particularly around AI, ML, even some of the kind of like 5G languages that we're seeing emerging now. Developers feel that the pressure's on to keep up with these technologies. More and more of things like code review, automation, automated testing, planning, and devs here, this point here about this all in a day's work, devs continue to take on more ops and security responsibilities. And I think that's a side effect of what we've seen with cloud. I think that's a side effect with what we see with things like Kubernetes deployments, etc. Developers now are much more in the space of, and also around technologies like GitOps. So developers are much more in the realm of defining their infrastructure, defining how their clusters are configured, defining how their applications actually finally get deployed as well onto those environments. So that's a trend that's emerged. And also, as mentioned before, the security aspect has come into play much more now, because that's on the developers to fix these things. Because we don't want these security things to fester so far down the line that they're so hard to fix in 3 weeks' time when our security team finally see that we've introduced the vulnerability. So we take on more ops and sec responsibilities. Advanced programming languages for the future, and also soft skills, so team skills, so not just sitting there coding all day long. How can developers actually be more effective, and how can they be vocal and be empowered to contribute to decisions with inside teams as well? And that's definitely something that we're seeing from the development kind of environment. In terms of, just quickly on this point about the operations side of things, developers now are going to be introducing and instrumenting their applications for monitoring. I think that's about 38% of developer respondents now are firmly in the space of configuring their applications so that they can be monitored. Infrastructure definitions up there as well. Monitoring their own applications is in that space too, and on call, annoyingly, to respond to any kind of production issue, etc. So again, I think this is probably devs thinking a side effects of DevOps. You know, you write the thing, you run the thing, you try and fix it as you go through, and that's what we're seeing from the developer side of things. From security, these are the kind of highlights that we have. DevSecOps is definitely the topic now with them. Security now see themselves in the thick of it. Interestingly now, security see themselves being more hands-on with other team members, and when we think about team members, we can think about the team, the development, the product team, in order to ensure that the product that they're providing is as secure as it can possibly be. So there's definitely been this, as well as shifting left via automation and introducing vulnerability scanning and checking with inside tools like GitLab and GitLab Ultimate. There's also the requirement for security professionals to describe how they want that piece of functionality to actually work. So there's things like security policies, etc., that you can define. Security need to tell developers about what's allowable and what's not allowable, whether or not they can dismiss vulnerabilities, and what happens if they dismiss a vulnerability. Can that actually, be finally merged back into a position where it can be released into production, etc. So we're seeing this communication path increase now with developers talking to, with security talking to developers. DevSecOps teams, there's more scans taking place as part of the delivery of software. The results delivery, this point here about results delivery continues to lag. What we ideally want to do is identify vulnerabilities ASAP inside the SDLC CI/CD pipeline. Then a developer can immediately remediate that given the correct information. What is not good is if we merge our changes, put them into a test environment somewhere, then finally the test team have got like a test window, or the security team have got a security window to scan your product, and then finally 2 weeks later, come back with a ticket saying, by the way, your code violates log4 shell or whatever. That's not good. So we want to improve the rate at which those results are provided, and the best way we think to do it is within the path, the delivery path for the actual developers. It says here, closing the gap, it's complicated, but relations between sec and dev are improving slowly. Probably some of you are thinking like it's never going to happen. But we're generally seeing that in the real world. Security are definitely feeling that way. And this interesting point here about the security folks and their level of optimism that they have. So they've never been as concerned about security as they have right now. So 43% of security pros feel somewhat or very unprepared for the future. So this is an interesting stat. They're in a very fast-moving world. There's lots of things going on. There's lots of different types of vulnerability being introduced. And there's also a requirement for organizations to release as soon as they can. So there's definitely the pressure on to understand what's actually going on in their world. As far as scanning goes, firstly, the statistic here, 57% of security pros and teams have already shifted left or are planning to this year. So these are the kind of stats that we have around the different types of scanning that we can do. Those of you who are interested in GitLab Ultimate, we can talk about this later on, but the level of scanning that we can provide and the different tools that we have. But this is the kind of breakdown that we're seeing right now. So we're looking at static application security testing, dynamic application security testing, container scanning, dependency scanning, and also license compliance checks, etc. That's all taking place at the moment. If you want to embed that in your pipeline, you can do so with GitLab. and we can automate all those kind of functions. And the roles, in terms of how this actually looks, the challenges that we have, prioritizing vulnerability remediation. So how do we actually order and fix the vulnerabilities that have arrived? You know, how do we get them into an order of prioritization? Tardy testing. So this is probably alluding to a lack of testing from the development space in terms of things that should be testing, either JUnit test or code quality analysis or SAST testing, which probably should have been tested earlier in the cycle, is making its way further down the line, so it's caught late where it's not in a good position to be fixed. The third point here is finding developers to actually fix these security issues. So how many of you actually committed something, done a build, deployed into production, and thought, that's it, my job is done? So I'm sure most of you kind of seen that situation. A small hand going up at the front there, thank you very much. Well done for admitting that one. So sometimes it's, the teams move on, teams change. So teams move around, teams go on to different products, people leave, people come, etc. So it's difficult sometimes finding developers to fix these issues. The point here about the volume of false positives, a hot topic within the space, obviously, of security scanners. We don't want to waste our time getting involved in the world of trying to rectify false positives. So the quality of the tools that are being used now have to reflect that, and also we need to have continually updated data on what are false positives within those tools as well, and tracking vulnerability statuses as well within inside here. The interest from security, AI/ML, as mentioned before, they're interested in this. Anything that's going to be useful for making their job easier is good for them. Again, from the security side, communication and collaboration, they realize that they need to talk to the teams now to get things done. And this point here about advanced programming, I think that's kind of linked into AI/ML, etc. So 10% of security pros have more budget as well. Finally, with the operations folks, these are the highlights from ops. So operations folks now are finding themselves in a world where they have to be something like a DevOps coach, a platform engineer, a cloud administrator. Operations has more roles than ever here. They're suffering from data overload, with a third of them saying it's difficult to find and access needed information sometimes. So there's too much information sometimes coming from builds. They don't know how to sift that information and make it useful so they can actually rectify anything that they need to do. Automation is definitely key here. Teams here realize that there is a desire to automate as much as you can if it's required. And 44% of the operations teams are mostly automated, a big jump from 2021. And again, soft skills and programming languages are the most important skills that they think they can currently have. The roles that they're seeing now within inside the ops field, top three here: managing cloud infrastructure, managing the cloud, managing infrastructure, and also maintaining tool chains as well. So again, going back to the topic of tool chains that have been linked together via DevOps engineer or a similar role. There is now, there's a big requirement for them to maintain tool chains. If they considered a pre-configured DevOps platform, DevSecOps platform, that's one less thing for them to think about. And other tasks that they're getting involved in here is things like automation, coaching, compliance, and platform engineering as well. We're seeing a lot of organizations come to us now where they've gone down the route of being good at CI/CD, being good at building a DevOps, being good at streamlining the SDLC. But one of the things they've actually overlooked is compliance requirements for their industry. So there are now compliance checkpoints that we speak to with a lot of organizations. Betting companies, interestingly, is one of the ones that we speak to quite a lot. They have a set of checkpoints that they have to tick off. So what we try and do with GitLab as a product is try and introduce compliance frameworks. So when things build within inside the product, we know that it's gone through certain compliance checkpoints and criteria that can enable it to be released and tracked and audited into production. Again, the big whinge from there's still too many tools. There's 58% of teams use Google Cloud, followed by AWS and Azure. There's lots of tools out there. There is a desire to standardize on one type of technology. That's always going to happen within tech. As we know, there's always going to be like big philosophical wars between who thinks that he's got the best cloud provider and who's got the best build tools, etc. Operations roles, so really, automation here. This is really 68% fully or mostly automated. And again, things like programming, soft skills, etc. Is the way that they see their roles evolving. That's the results from the survey that we have. Does anybody have any questions? We've got 5 minutes or so before we go, or opinions on what's been delivered to you at all. Did it all make sense? Yes, please go ahead. Yeah. 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 So the question was around observability. What does it really mean, and what are the data points that we can consider? So it's a massive area. We can go all the way from tools like DevSecOps tools being able to measure metrics around things like value stream analytics, DORA 4 metrics, etc., to actually measure the performance of teams. So we can put observability points around that and use data for that. So typically inside the GitLab world, we can measure the speed from a commit into a merge request to a delivery into production as being like a lead time for delivery, etc. On the other end of the scale, we can get into things like application observability. What's the application doing in its deployed environment? And if something happens in that deployed environment, how do we actually respond to that? And either rewind, back out the deployment and go to a previous version, etc. That's an interesting, on the app side, which I think you might be alluding to more than anything. We recently acquired a company called OpsTrace. There is an evolving piece of work and a number of different epics within inside GitLab that are going to be kind of firming up our roadmap and our story around how we do that with deployed applications. We did have a mechanism where we can deploy apps into Kubernetes clusters and get metrics back via Prometheus, and then also measure those, get some events that we can trigger if CPU usage goes over a certain amount, or there's noisy neighbor things going on the cluster. We could back out deployments. That's changing now after the acquisition of OpsTrace. We're getting into more slightly different roadmap. I would probably say right now, in all honesty, for pure application observability, there are better tools than what we currently have. We are a DevOps platform, and there are application monitoring platforms like Datadog and tools like that will probably do a better job than what we currently can do. But yeah, there's different points. Our strong point generally is going to be around DORA 4, value stream analytics, value stream management, observability of how quickly we're burning through these tasks from our plan stage on the platform. So issues and epics, etc., how quickly they're being consumed and delivered, etc. Any other questions, folks? All make sense? All useful? Yeah? Good stuff. Right, so that's that, folks. Thank you very much. I think I've just finished on time for the first time ever. There's my details there. If you want to have a chat downstairs, we're here for the next couple of days or so. Please come and talk to us. I'm more than happy to run through demos of Ultimate and talk about anything to do with either this presentation or what the roadmap is for GitLab, etc., and where we think the kind of industry is going, etc. So thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your conference here.